Hey, truth be told, Captain Ron here for Tony Sweet. We are live at the UFO Congress 2019. Charlotte Mann has been kind enough to sit down and talk with us for a few minutes. And, you know, back in 1941, Cape Girardeau is the famous case, that's the name that I knew it by, where her grandfather was a minister?
Baptist minister.
A Baptist minister, and they came and they asked him to come out because there was a crash. So he thought it was a car crash, and he went out to give the last rites.
Not a car crash.
A plane crash.
They thought it was a small plane in a field, in a farmer's field.
Okay.
And evidently they had called to town, and the police officer called and asked my granddad, because he's a Baptist minister, would he be willing to drive out with them? They'd pick him up in case anybody needed any help.
Sure, like last rites or that
Well,
kind of a thing, or
Baptists
kind of.
don't do last rites, but
Well, sort of.
yeah.
But that's sort of a religious reason would be.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely,
I see.
absolutely. And so they came by and picked him up, and it just so happened at that particular time, my mother and dad and uncle had come to Cape Girardeau to visit Grandma and Grandpa. So they were there when they came to get him, and so Granddad explained. He left, they picked him up, and when they got out there, it wasn't a plane crash at all. It was a UFO, an alien ship. It had Granddad said it looked like it had kind of broken in half because the middle part was kind of open and standing out. Not much fire, just like a little grass fire. I mean, nobody was burnt. Outside, immediately right outside the saucer, there were two, Grandpa at the time called them little people.
Well, don't forget, this is 1941, 6 years before Roswell even happened.
Right.
So it's not even in the zeitgeist that there's aliens or UFOs or things. It's funny that you even said the word UFO. I mean, how would you even know what to call that?
Right. Well, a foreign object, a lot of them did. And there were, you could peek inside, or you could see inside the saucer itself. And all the way around, it seemed to impress Granddad, why I don't know, but all the way around on the inside of the craft was a band, and there were etchings. And Granddad said the best that he could describe it was it looked like what Egyptian hieroglyphs are.
Sure.
Looked kind of like that. There were small chairs that looked like could be kids' size. One thing that's never been revealed other than my granddad telling my father was in the middle was a round pedestal-looking thing. And on top of it, there was something that he said looked kind of like a gyroscope. So he was observing those things.
Does it fascinate you now, as we learn more about UFOs and things, how consistent this is with other reports? Even Bob Lazar talks about being inside a UFO craft, and he talks about in the middle there being this half a basketball thing floating. Very similar to your account
Right.
from 1941.
Yeah. Well, you know, when you grow up with something, you think everybody knows about this stuff. We had a picture of the alien, and
Well, that's another famous aspect of this case,
Yeah.
is that your grandfather had this picture
right,
of two gentlemen holding up an alien being,
one of the deceased ones.
and
Yeah.
you yourself saw this live first person. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. From the time I was about 6, because my granddad had had a stroke, he told my dad he wanted him to keep the picture, which was not the smartest thing in the world. I love my dad, but he could be, you know, you just didn't do that.
But he's different than your grandfather, who was a
Oh,
very
very.
serious, honorable man, wasn't he?
Very, very. But he was also, even for that time, very progressive. He was never...
For a Baptist minister.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And he had wide interests, and he did not ever put anybody or anything in a box. He kind of just took things as they came. But my dad, up until I was in my early teens, we had that picture at our home. And every time Dad and my mother would have a dinner party or friends over, well, somehow it would get around to UFOs and,
And in 1941, we didn't have Photoshop, we didn't have hoaxes. This wasn't even in the zeitgeist. Nobody knew about UFOs and aliens. So to me, and especially from him, your grandfather,
Right.
in that time period, that's about as credible as you get for a photograph. And you've seen this firsthand yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
So I would like you to tell us what it looked like in that picture.
In that picture, okay. It looked like an open field with grass maybe knee-high.
Okay.
Behind the two men that were holding the alien up, there was a couple of large trees. The men had on kind of a dress slacks, and one had a waistcoat, the old waistcoats, and they had hats on, the old
Sure.
fedoras. And they held it up.
Appropriate to the time.
Exactly. And we don't know who they were. They happened to be out there. A couple of them were, I think, professional photographers. And how that picture came about was one of them had brought his own personal little brownie camera. They're little boxes. They're about this big. And when they took pictures, they had the black lines around the outside in this sculptured like punch marks around it. And when the military showed up later, very unexpectedly, very quickly, they scared a lot of people to death with, warning them. They confiscated all of the cameras, the professional ones that they knew, but he stuck this one under his coat, and they didn't get it. And about a week after the incident happened, the doorbell rang, and Granddad went to the door, and it was this gentleman, and he said, Granddad, I remember him telling my dad that the man was obviously shaken still. They scared him to death, and he told my granddad, he said, well, I know that at some time the world needs this, but I'm afraid to keep it. Will you keep the copy because of who he was? And Granddad said yes, he would. And so that's the picture that I saw all growing
Now,
up.
this all makes perfect logical sense to me, especially given that time period, especially given all that. That makes perfect. I'd go to a priest or a minister and say, could you, because it's too much for me to.
Right.
And the fact that he took a picture with a private little camera, all of these things make sense. This just does not seem like anything that would be faked. So this is real. But you skipped the important part. You told us what the guys looked like. What did the alien look like?
Oh, geez. It was always difficult for me because I could describe almost everything, but not below the knees, hardly, because I was always so asphyxiated with the eyes. There was something very kind
Now,
of...
you don't normally hear that in the alien world, do you?
No.
It's always the eyes, exactly. It's
Yeah.
Captivating, right? Is it the Whitley Strieber cover? Is that it? The communion cover? Ish?
A little, but not quite as menacing as Whitley.
You may be one of the few people that have really seen what an alien being looks like. So I want you to give me as much of a description as you can.
Well, he was about 4 feet tall.
Okay.
And I know this sounds crazy, and I've been challenged on it. They were like soft, like an octopus.
Okay. Fleshy.
Yes, not like,
Skeletal.
I know they had bones.
Okay.
They had to, because they stood up. But you couldn't see, it didn't seem like that. It just almost, like an octopus. These were light gray. The faces,
Did it seem like they didn't have any clothes on, like it was just him?
you
Unless that was a uniform. We don't know.
I don't know what that
Right.
was. At one point, it kind of looked like, my grandmother described it as crumpled up a tinfoil. Well,
Okay.
it didn't look exactly like that to me. It looked like skin, but yet there were no private parts like we show. The faces, they did not have ears. They had little dots where we have ears. The mouth was very small, no lips, just like you draw a pencil line across. And two little dots where the nostrils would be, but not noses like we have.
And the almond eyes?
The eyes on this one, they were almond, but not going this way. they were going this way, but not as skinny as in Whitley's cover on his
Okay.
book. He and I talked about that. Seemed to be a little bit wider, no eyelids, and just this dark, black.
Giant black eyes like
Exactly. And I had been asked, and people said, well, did they have pupils? No, we're talking just two black orbs.
that. Right.
But yet, from seeing the picture year after year, there was an emotion there, not like a human emotion, but an emotion that he was aware that Granddad was doing something kind
So
for him.
we think this one was alive at the time.
Oh, he was alive. Granddad said the two were definitely deceased, but the third one was a little further out from the saucer, and he was breathing, and you could see it. It was very shallow. His chest would raise. I think he only had 3 fingers, and the arms were extremely long. They held him under the armpits and with the wrists out, both men on either side. I can't tell you about his feet because, like I said, he had legs, he had feet, but
They
I
might have
can't-
been cropped too.
well,
Yeah.
I don't know. But as a young girl, I didn't look at the feet.
Did the face seem fleshy too, or
No, they weren't. When I say fleshy, when you're speaking of flesh, I mean not fat, not
Right.
heavy. They were thin, but not.
But it seemed like a
emaciated.
skin, or did it seem plasticky, or
No, it was. Granddad said
scaly?
it felt like a moist fish.
Oh, he felt it.
Oh, he held its wrist in its hand as he prayed for him. Yes.
He held his wrist in his hand, and it
Yes.
said it felt like a fish.
Well, like a cool, like a fish, clammy, a
Interesting.
little bit clammy. So yeah, it
Interesting.
didn't feel, but it felt like not our skin exactly, but that.
Yeah, and it was gray in color to you.
Very gray in color.
Okay.
And very universally gray all over.
Interesting.
As a young child, I looked at it, well, I was 6 or 7.
Still got to stick in your brain like it
Well,
was today,
does.
right?
And I thought, well, now, is that a suit? Or is that... But it had to have been him because there was no neck, there was no zipper, there was nothing to indicate that. And later, I realized it was him. It's what they were.
It's so incredible to me to think of this in the time period. In 1941, there aren't movies on TV about this. There aren't books on this. You've probably never even heard the word UFO or alien or anything like that.
Well, the thing about it is, even in the latter years, in the 50s and 60s, mainly the 50s, I didn't have any reference for it then.
Right.
And we discussed it at home. I saw the picture. I questioned when my dad was a smart man. Everybody on his side of the family in the 40s had degrees from college, the women and the men. So they were intelligent people. But my dad tended to lay it on a little thick. You know what I'm saying? And so my grandmother got ill with cancer. Granddad had passed away, and she came to my home to stay while she took chemotherapy, and then we lost her. And I took
Well, that during that deathbed time is when you got a chance to talk to her, right?
I hate to use the word deathbed. She died after the fact, and I didn't badger her on
And
it.
she was in bed, so therefore.
Yeah. So, but I wanted to ask her the questions that I had.
Sure.
Things I had heard my dad say, and it's like, okay, I want to know grandmother, because grandma was worse than granddad. It took me several days, or if not weeks.
You mean worse than Granddad as far as that she was letter of the law, serious, straightforward, unlike your father that might embellish a little bit.
Exactly. There would never be embellishment with her.
Right.
And Granddad had said, we will not speak of it outside this household. And he had passed away, and she still wouldn't talk to me for days about it. And I finally convinced her that I said, Grandma, the world needs to know these things, and I need to know, because that's part of our history.
I think so.
And so she began to answer, and I found out where Dad embellished and how, and I, tossed that out, and ways and things I hadn't known more degree of. Because Granddad came back that night and they were all waiting up for him, and he relayed everything. And Dad and Grandmother both said that when Granddad walked in, he was very pale. He was always quiet and serious-minded, but it had changed him. And I think it
How would it not change anybody?
I can't imagine that it wouldn't.
Right.
But he took it more as matter of fact. Oh, I didn't know this about God.
Right.
You know?
It seems like he took it very straight, and even that he helped the alien. It's like, I wouldn't even think to help the alien. I'd be going, "Oh my God, what is that?"
Right. And he prayed over the other two that were already gone. But he felt.
Great of him to do that.
Well, that was just who he was.
Yeah.
That was my granddad. He was like that.
Yeah.
And so it became real for me. And then I'm not a researcher. I'm an experiencer. And so, after that, I didn't go and study UFOs, but I went to try to find information that was relevant to me, that would make my story, because that's part of my life, valid. And I was able, with help from some wonderful people, to do that. And
You know what I'm thinking of when you say this is, I wonder, since that was 41, Roswell in 1947 was a big story.
absolutely.
Your family had to see that newspaper and go, "Aha!"
Oh yeah. Oh
That
yeah.
had to be an
Well,
amazing thing
my
to you,
the
compared to
funny
most
thing,
folks.
my dad, our household was very eclectic anyway, and I remember many times my dad buying comic books, Flash Gordon and different things like that. And my mother would just get so disgusted with him, and she'd say, "Guy, you're a grown man with an education. What are you doing?" And he said, "Pauline, one of these days, this will be a reality. This will
Science
happen."
fiction becomes science fact.
Absolutely, it does.
Look, now we got a computer in our pocket right now.
Okay.
They say that we got to the moon with less computing power than what's on your phone. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Right. Well, when you get into certain realms, and that's another interesting thing, but that people don't know about me or my family, is that after the fact, one of my clients brought the book to me called The Watchers by Raymond Fowler. And in that, he surmised that if you had ever had what I thought third or fourth degree connection, in other words, touching, being in the presence of aliens, they tend
Of the third kind.
right. They tended to follow families, and I thought, aha. Because nobody could ever explain why I was born the way I was born. And
Because this experience happened right before you were born.
2 years.
And what's also interesting is, you and I discussed this a second ago, that typically most of the alien abduction cases that I hear of, it's through the family. You're born with this. You have it when you're 2, 3, 4, 5, through your life, and then your kids will have it. That's typically what we hear. Once in a while, you get a one-off, like Travis Walton, which was a one-time case,
Right.
one visit, never happened again.
Right.
That's very rare.
Right.
Your case is very unique in that your grandfather, as far as I know, previous to 1941, nobody knows they had an alien abduction experience. Then when he had this encounter, then things started happening in your family.
Exactly.
This is a very unique case in that
And
case.
it goes on to this day.
Amazing.
It goes on to this day. I hear them,
Hear what? ETs?
aliens. I will hear information. I have been abducted, my sister and I both. My daughter's been abducted from my house where I live in Texas. It has never stopped.
See, for
and-
you, it's been your whole life then.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and it's molded my life. I started out, like I said, I had these gifts and things going on, and I thought everybody, that was normal.
Right. Everybody has an alien abduction experience. Why not?
I mean, I didn't know. And people would, I don't remember what I said, but when I was in junior high school, I do remember it was one of my girlfriend's mother became very ill. And I think I told her she was, which she shouldn't do, wasn't going to make it. She was going to die. Well, I got called into the principal's office. My mother got called up there, and they wanted to know what I thought I was doing. And I mean, they went berserk.
Why'd you say this? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And mother didn't get upset. You know, when I would hear voices, I remember playing one day, and there was 4 of us kids, and we were poor, and we shared a bedroom. So I was never by myself. I was by myself one day. And I'm hearing a man talk to me. It's an odd man's voice, but a very strong voice. I went running into the kitchen. Mother was doing the dishes, and I said, "Mama, somebody's talking to me." Oh, she picked up her dish towel, dried her hands, halfway turned. She looked at me. She said, "Well, honey, is it a man or a woman?" I said, "It's a man." "Oh," she said, "well, that's God. Listen to him. He's never wrong. Never take credit for what he tells you. And be true to that. Listen to him." And so I do readings for people.
So you thought this was God at the time as a child?
Well, it was God. I have 2 factions, 2 different areas. It's like for years and years and years, I had this absolutely full-blown, beautiful spiritual life. Also had the same over here with the UFO thing, and they did not go together.
But there is some overlap. There's a lot of stuff in here in religious, even in the Bible. There's a lot of times where religion and then spirits and aliens kind of combine, and we don't really know what's what.
They're all in there.
They're all in there. Exactly.
They're all in there. And so what happened is I began to, I had what they call a dark night of the soul. You ever heard of that?
I have not.
There's a dark night of the soul that comes in people's lives. Not everybody.
I don't think I want to have a dark night of the soul. That sounds like the worst thing.
You don't. It's when you have so many things happen out of the ordinary and traumatic that some people lose it. Just absolutely devastates them.
Well, it's another thing. PTSD is another thing that a lot of these people suffer from.
Yeah. Yes. And so in the early 70s, you know, I'd gone on with my life. In the early 70s, my husband, it started with my dad. My dad killed himself, shot himself, okay? Then on Christmas Day, my husband of 14 years was killed on Christmas Day with a train hitting him. Jesus. I had a major surgery, and I just had a brand new baby that they thought I was going to lose. This all happened in less than a 6-month period, and my aunt passed away. I looked for answers, trust me, in every religion you can imagine. Preachers, churches, nobody had any answers for me. And so I was waiting to go into the church for my father's service. Well, you know what structured religion thinks about suicide. And being raised Baptist, I thought my dad was in hell, unforgivable sin, he doesn't have any water. I mean, I can't tell you how I felt. And I started to walk into the service finally. And my voice that I know to be God speaking, that my mother said, "Charlotte, look up." And I looked up to the ceiling to my right. And there was my daddy and Christ, just as solid as you look.
Get out of here.
Floating out through the top of the ceiling. They both smiled. They didn't say a word. They both smiled. And I knew at that moment I had a joy and a peace I've never felt before.
This is amazing. You've combined the ET experience with a religious experience while seeing a ghostly apparition that you say looked as real as I do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Solid.
Thinner, I'm sure, but I know what you mean.
Well, no, he wasn't so thin. But the thing of it is, I knew from that point forward that probably the larger part of what I had been told about the world, told about structured religion, it just didn't exist.
That you were told from earth-bound things, right?
Yes.
Right, which you had discovered, I see.
And so from that point forward, I began to reconnect. I prayed to God, and I just knew that if I followed him, and I didn't have to go to any church, because he was right here. Now, there's great people in a lot of different churches, and I was invited and able to go to the Parliament of the World Religions in 1993, where 125 major religions, the caliber of the Dalai Lama, some I'd never heard of. And when I went there, 8 days, God put me in positions you just couldn't believe. I smoked a pipe in a male Indian circle with Yellowtail and Thomas Binyanga, the keeper of the Hopi prophecy.
Wow.
And he shared all of the prophecy with me.
Really?
So my whole life was one event after the other like that. And I was places, and I know that God used me in that way because he knew what I'd do. I'm just a mouth. I've never written a book because I'm not a writer, and I've gotten in a lot of trouble because of it. But I share things, and I share it from a place of truth, from a place of your heart, and we carry God in every answer that we have. Every answer that we have. It's not out here. It's right here. And we can, through meditation, through raising our consciousness and our vibration, we can access that, and you're never alone. And what people don't understand, and as I've had clients come to me, and I became also a hypnotherapist because I do past lives and things like that to help people. But the beauty of it is this: if you have that, and you know there is no death, because I've got a friend that's died 3 times.
Then this is all meaningless.
Yes. And so when there's not the fear of the dying, when there's not your same, the answers that you get, they come from your inner self. And guess what God is? Guess what the meaning of life is? I have so many clients.
These are 2 quick questions that normally let's hear. Do you know what the answers are?
I do. The meaning of life is love.
Okay.
God has nobody because he is a high vibrational consciousness. And that is love. And so if you do the best you can in your life, first of all, some of the structured religion things we're supposed to live up to, it's a joke. He doesn't expect it in the first place. Because guess what? We're in a human body. If you're in a human body, you're in the earth, which is hell. We come here to learn.
Oh, Earth is hell, huh?
You bet.
Not just my life, just you mean in general. I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
We come here to learn. We go back, and if you believe in reincarnation, you come again.
Do you?
Am I coming back? I don't think I've got all the answers, so I'm sure I'll be back many
Right.
times.
I mean, that's the whole Michael Newton thing, I thought, and was that the past life regression is that we do come back, and
I have lived other lives, yes, and I'm
you have,
aware of
and
them.
you're aware of them and everything, and that seems to be the thing where this is like we're on stage, and that's the real life backstage.
Exactly. The real life, this is not our reality. And people will come, and I'll say, okay, I don't know you, I've never seen him before in my life. And I'll say, who are you? Explain to me who you are. Because they don't know. And so I tell them, they'll say, well, I'm a mother, I'm this, I'm a filmmaker, I'm this. No. You're 50% human, and that's what you've been raised as, and that's what you've learned. But that's not all that you are.
You're backstage.
The other part of you is 50% or more, if you work at it, a very high spiritual being, and we are that. And I have a friend that's died 3 times. His name is Daniel Brinkley. I've known him for 24 years. And he's seen us. He's seen the other side, and they keep sending him back. And at one point, they had him on a gurney, taking him down to be embalmed. So it wasn't like they just thought he died. He died, and he watched him, and he's just a character.
You saw him out of body?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I said to him, he keeps his original death certificate. And I said, Daniel, why are you keeping that? And he said, sure. He said, listen, I'm waiting for the IRS to come after me. And he said, when they do, I'm dead. So if we are that, we are so much more than we know. Sinner, if you look it up, says falling short of the mark. That's what we do. God puts us down here. He gives us a lesson. We learn from it. He doesn't punish us.
And don't you think we've chose this life?
Absolutely.
This is all that Richard Martini
We
explains.
we've chosen our life. We've chosen our parents that we came. We made a deal with him as to what we were going to do for humanity.
Do you think that's part of our soul group?
Absolutely.
Yep.
And soul groups can come back together. There's one town.
Well, they say that your mother and father could be your sister, your boyfriend.
Oh,
whatever.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And if you have unfinished business with them, they'll come back close to you this time. So very, very interesting, but off the subject of the UFOs.
Yeah.
But I had all of that. And then I had the UFO thing. And I knew that was real. I mean, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I'm not trying to prove it or convince anybody now. I simply will share my truth, what I saw, what I happened. I won't change it. I won't embellish it. And I let people make up their mind, but what they go away with and what I love so much, they have the key.
Well, I appreciate you sharing it with us. And I'll tell you what's interesting about your story, too, is that this is one of the earliest accounts I know of, 1941. I mean, and it's also so typical of the alien experience. It's the same sort of beings that are often described. It's the same sort of craft that's described. It's the same sort of interior of the craft. It's the same sort of, it happens with abductions after an experience.
It hasn't changed.
So, I mean,
Not much.
your story sort of laid it out, which kept happening, and keeps happening today. Again, the more I hear the exact same story, the more valid it becomes and the stronger it seems to be real.
Yeah. Well, there's one earlier that I'm aware of because I was brought into it, was in 1897.
Well, we talked about that just a few minutes
Yeah.
ago, that there's a lot of cases. They go back a few hundred years,
Yeah.
but not with the prevalence.
Exactly.
Like Roswell changed everything. That hit the map. Everybody saw the newspaper.
Right.
Everybody got that. This didn't hit the newspaper that day.
No.
You know what I'm saying? Even the ones 1897, yeah, Aurora, Texas, there were a few of these little things, but it wasn't this Roswell. That's what changed everything. And now we all know what that is. If you came after Roswell, you know what it is, you know? Before that, boy, that's a stronger case. And yours is in 1941, and yet it's so typical
Right.
of the classic alien experience. It's
That's
amazing.
because it is very simple.
Yeah.
It's the same way with God. Things of God are very simple. That's why people tend to miss them. Or they have, I tell my clients all the time, I am nobody special, and I'm not. Everybody has the abilities within them if they want to do the work. But, you work at it, and you stay true to that love and that heart. I can love a Jeffrey Dahmer. I don't want him around me
Right.
because I know inside there is a part of that divinity.
Backstage.
It may be buried, we don't know what's happened to it. I can love that, the namaste, if you will. But I don't want it around me, don't want it around my kids.
Right.
But it's about that acceptance of one another. And I experienced it in the Parliament with people from all over the world. The man registering in front of me was from Mecca, and it's like, oh my God.
It's incredible.
The Dalai Lama was this close to me, and it's like, he's like a little child. He laughs, he giggles. And so it's about, at one point when it was very difficult to speak about God as God, they wanted to call it something else or no, and God said to me, the voice, it said, well, you have to keep on, Charlotte, but don't mention me. How are you going to do that?
It's like the movie God, Oh
Yeah.
God, or whatever.
Yeah, and you know what he said to me in answer? Humanity. Speak of the humanities. Everybody has portions of that. We all have those commonalities. If you connect them with that, they have me.
Wow. Well, it's actually an incredible story. I really appreciate you sharing it with us. I mean, it's amazing. It's really enjoyed it. You've had an incredible life starting off at age one day. You had that background with your
Exactly.
grandfather starting that, and then you ended up having these amazing experiences in your own life.
Right,
Incredible.
right. I I know. I look back and some of the things when I was coming here, it's like, okay, going through all the paperwork and things, it's like, what do I say in an hour? I mean, what do you want me to, you know,
We could talk for 6 hours. What are you
oh,
talking
forever,
about? Yeah, right.
you know, and it's all, and as I was reading it, I thought, that was me, but yet it's hard for me to think about the situations, to think about where God put me and with whom He put me, and the networking and how it all finally came together. And it's absolutely amazing. It's never boring at my house. I can
I
tell
bet
you
not.
that.
Well, thank you for sharing your life and your grandfather's life with us. We really appreciate it. It's an amazing story. I think it's one of the really strong, valid UFO stories that are part of this whole subculture, and I think it's very important. And thank you so much for sharing it with us. For Tony Sweet, I'm Captain Ron, and truth be told, we're here at UFO Congress 2019.